The movie starts with Max drowning in a frosty ocean, desperately trying to stay afloat. But it's all in vain, and he eventually sinks to the bottom, where there are other dead bodies of criminals. While drowning, he narrates how, when his body is found, it'll be too late for anyone to know he was different from the rest of the criminals in the ocean. Then, he has a flashback to the day he had found his wife and child murdered. Right after the flashback, he comments that his actions were an easy mistake to make. The scene then shifts to 1 week earlier at the police department, with Max working as a clerk in the cold case unit. Two officers walk over to drop a cold case at his office, and one of them comments that every case that is dropped on his table is considered dead and unsolvable. Upon hearing this, the other officer invites Max for a drink after work, but Max responds with silence. Curious, the officer asks a colleague about Max's life story, so the colleague tells him that Max's wife and daughter were murdered, and since the perpetrators haven't been found, the case was considered closed and dead. Meanwhile, Max hasn't given up on finding his wife's killer. One day, he visits the house of his informants and sees there's a party going on. So, he barges in and forcefully requests intel from his informant. Natasha, one of the party guests, sees Max and becomes interested in him, so she approaches him for a conversation. However, he notices a unique tattoo on her wrist and compliments it. As they start talking, Mona, who's Natasha's sister, sees them together and forcefully pulls Natasha away. Max immediately confronts her, and as she sees his police badge, she walks away, leaving Natasha with him. Max becomes suspicious of the party, so he takes a stroll around and discovers a room filled with people doing drugs. He also notices a tattoo similar to Natasha's, which intensifies his curiosity. As he watches the scene in the room, a strange man with tattoos on his face comes out of nowhere and quietly watches him from behind. When he notices the man's presence, they begin to stare at each other. Fortunately, Natasha arrives in time to save him. He takes her to his house and asks about the man's identity, but she ignores the question and insists that they make out with each other, even impersonating his late wife. Seeing this, he yells at her to get out of his house.
I said, get out now.
Outside, she makes a phone call asking for more drugs. Unknown to her, the strange tattoo man from the party is stalking her. As she gets to a lonely alley, some mysterious flying creatures appear and begin to chase after her. She tries to run from them, but mistakenly trips and falls, so the creatures catch up to her and kill her. The next day, as Max arrives at the police department for work, an officer calls him over and invites him to check out a crime scene together.
Look, jump in, will you?
When they arrive at the location, the officer tells him that his wallet was found on the dead body. Upon hearing this, he checks out the body, and when he sees the tattoo on the wrist, he immediately identifies the body as Natasha's.
Natasha.
This makes him the prime suspect in her death. The officer immediately drives him away from the scene to a lonely area and begins to question his relationship with the dead girl. Max denies being her killer and insists that he knows nothing about her death. When the officer tries to probe for more information, Max flares up and accuses him of failing to find the killer of his wife and daughter. The officer is affected by Max's words, so that day at the office, as he reviews Natasha's case file, the tattoo on her wrist catches his attention, so he immediately pulls out the case files relating to Max's dead wife. As he looks through the file, he realizes that one of her murderers had the same style of tattoo on Natasha's wrist. He immediately phones Max, but the number is unreachable, so he drops a voice note. Meanwhile, Mona learns of her sister's death, and her informant gives her a photo of Max, since he was the last person her sister met up with. On the other hand, Max listens to the voice note from the officer saying that there might be a connection between Natasha's death and his deceased wife. The voice note from the officer tells him to meet at his apartment, so Max rushes home but finds the door unlocked. Feeling suspicious, he pulls out his gun and walks in. However, he sees the officer's dead body in the hallway, and as he attempts to walk closer, someone suddenly attacks and tosses him around multiple times. But before falling unconscious, Max manages to fire multiple times at the attacker. After a while, he regains consciousness in the hospital and sees his mentor by his bedside. The mentor informs him that the other officer had died and that the attacker had escaped without leaving a clue, making Max the prime suspect of the incident.
force has you pegged as the prime suspect.
Upon hearing this, Max decides to immediately leave the hospital to attend the burial of the officer. Seeing his intention, the mentor invites him to a change of dress at his company. It turns out the mentor owns a pharmaceutical company. Inside the building, Max notices an ad about the company's newly released drug. While looking at it, a shareholder sees him and walks over to sympathize with him on the loss of his wife. It turns out his wife was an important employee in the company. After changing into a new set of clothes, Max goes to the funeral of the officer. But the dead officer's wife slaps and accuses him of leading her husband to his death. As he walks out, a detective stops by and invites him to the station for interrogation on Natasha's death. At the station, Max denies being her killer and clarifies that he met her at a party and took her home. The detective finds this hard to believe and slams a case file on the table in anger. Seeing a picture from the file, Max recalls that the dead officer had something important to reveal to him. So, he barges into the officer's unit at the station, enters his office, and begins to search through the case files in his locker. This infuriates the other officers at the office, so they furiously bang on the locked door to send him out. Meanwhile, inside the office, Max breaks open a locker and finds Natasha's case file. There, he discovers that the last person she called after leaving his house was someone named Owen Green. He also looks at his dead wife's file and discovers that one of her killers had similar tattoos to Natasha's. After getting this information, he escapes through the window right at the moment the officers break through the door. That night, as Max walks home, he notices 3 mysterious men stalking him, so he dashes into an alley and pulls out his gun to wait for them. But someone suddenly points a gun at him from behind and instructs him to drop his weapon and kneel and surrender. He immediately obeys, so the person comes out of hiding. It turns out this person is Mona, Natasha's sister. She begins to hit him with a rod while questioning his involvement in the death of Natasha. After enduring several hits, Max confesses his innocence and also reveals that Natasha's killer must have been involved in the death of his wife. Mona finds this hard to believe and continues to blame him for Natasha's death since his wallet was found on her body. Max explains that if he were really behind her death, he wouldn't leave evidence to implicate himself. He also mentions Owen Green's name as the last person Natasha called before her death.
Who's Owen Green?
After hearing his explanation, Mona decides to believe him. That night, they drive together to Owen Green's apartment, and as they climb the stairs to his room, they hear him screaming loudly. When they get into his room, it turns out he's experiencing hallucinations from the drugs he takes. Upon seeing them, Owen Green backs away towards the window and begins to mutter random words. According to him, the winged creatures were responsible for Natasha's death and were there to take him away. Seeing him lean towards the open window, Max tries to talk sense into him, but Owen continues to utter random words. At this moment, Max notices the wing-shaped tattoo on his shoulder, which is similar to Natasha's. As Max contemplates the tattoos, Owen suddenly leans out of the window and hallucinates that a winged creature had pulled him out. In reality, he had fallen to his death. Seeing this, Max and Mona leave the apartment. Unknown to them, a strange man covered in tattoos is also there watching everything. Later that night, Max and Mona visit the tattoo shop where the dead Natasha got all her tattoos done. When they point out the winged-style tattoo design to the tattooist, the man tells them it's inspired by a Norse mythological deity that rewards soldiers who died in battle. He also reveals that the tattoo is a symbol of protection.
Vikings used to wear them for protection.
Hearing this, Max asks what they need protection from, but the tattooist is unable to answer. That night, Max drops Mona off to meet her boss. She asks her boss about the tattoos, so the boss reveals that a man named Lupino was responsible for all the deaths. The boss also warns her to stay away from Max since he's the target of higher-ups.
Stay away from Max Payne.
Meanwhile, Max is bothered by the wing-style tattoo, so he visits a storage unit to go through his dead wife's belongings and office paperwork. There, he finds an envelope belonging to the pharmaceutical company she was working with. As he looks closer, he realizes that the company's winged logo matches the winged tattoos, so he begins to suspect that someone in the company is responsible for the death of his wife. He immediately meets his mentor, who owns the company, in order to get the name of the worker who was his wife's supervisor. The mentor tries to stop him, but he insists on getting the name, so the mentor gives out the name of the supervisor. After he leaves, the mentor schedules a meeting with Detective Bravura to reveal that Max is getting out of control. The mentor also reveals the details of the night that Max's wife and daughter were murdered. It turns out that Max had returned home from work to notice something amiss in his house. He immediately runs to his wife's room, but encounters some men in the hallway.
Angels burn within them now.
After shooting and killing them, he storms into his wife's room to find her dead. After exposing this detail to the detective, the mentor also reveals that Max suspects a worker at the company of the death of his wife, so he needs to be stopped. Upon hearing this, the detective promises to put Max under control. The next day, Max visits his dead wife's supervisor at the pharmaceutical company and inquires about the last drug project his wife was working on before she died. But the supervisor feigns ignorance, so he locks the office door and begins to torture him for information. The secretary hears the commotion in the office and immediately calls Max's mentor for help. Meanwhile, Max pulls out a gun to threaten the supervisor, so the man reveals that Max's wife had been working on a stamina-enhancing drug for the military before her death. But the drug had been a disaster that only worked on 1% of the soldiers. The rest of the soldiers experienced hallucinations about demons and winged creatures. As the supervisor reveals details of the drugs, a SWAT team sent by the mentor storms into the company to arrest Max. Knowing what's coming, the supervisor shows Max an envelope containing all the truth and evidence. He also promises to reveal more details if Max guarantees his safety.
You gotta get me out of here, though.
Max agrees to this, grabs the envelope, and pulls him to escape out of the office. Unknown to them, the SWAT team is lying in wait. As soon as they step out, one of the soldiers suddenly shoots and kills the supervisor. As they redirect their gun to kill Max, he retaliates by shooting back at them, causing a shootout to occur. Amidst the gunfire, Max grabs the envelope from the dead supervisor and tries to escape the company, but he's shot in the shoulder. As he runs into a safe office, he suddenly meets Detective Bravura, who tries to stop him, but he manages to escape. Later that night, Mona meets him in an abandoned warehouse, so he invites her to watch a videotape he found in the envelope. From the video, they discover that Max's dead wife had been working on a drug to remove fear from soldiers and to enhance their strength. They also learn that the mentor's pharmaceutical company was behind the production of the drugs. Lupino, the strange tattooed man, had been a soldier and had volunteered to take the drugs. During an interview from the tape, Lupino reveals that taking the drugs made him feel like a fearless winged creature. Watching this video, Max concludes that Lupino must have ordered the death of his wife. Hearing this, Mona tells him where to find Lupino, so he grabs his gun to launch an attack on Lupino. Mona warns him of the dangers ahead, but he insists on carrying out his plans. Meanwhile, Lupino takes a shot of the drug and yells in a demonic battle cry. That night, Max infiltrates his lair and easily kills off all of his men. As Max enters his office, he bursts out of nowhere and ruthlessly attacks Max with a machete. Due to his enhanced strength from the drugs, he easily overpowers Max and begins to ramble about angels and demons. As he raises the machete to butcher Max, the mentor suddenly appears and fires a gun, killing him. Max is confused at the appearance of his mentor, but obediently follows him out while asking questions. Suddenly, he's knocked out by the mentor's secretary. As the secretary raises a gun to kill Max, the mentor stops and orders him to cuff Max. Later on, Max obediently follows them out with a cuff on his hands. At this point, the mentor begins to confess his involvement in the death of Max's wife. He reveals that his pharmaceutical company was the lead producer of the military drugs and that the dead wife had wanted to expose the adverse effects of the drugs to the media, so he had to kill her to prevent a scandal from breaking out. He brags about how killing Max's wife made him feel superior and powerful. He also confesses that he had been using Lupino all along to achieve his objectives. At the end of his confession, he admits that he had personally killed Max's newborn baby. After hearing this, the secretary urges him to kill Max and end the drama, but he yells at the secretary to calm down. Then he lifts a heavy metal and drops it beside Max before slipping 2 bottles of drugs into Max's jacket. On the other hand, his secretary prepares a rope, and they prepare to drown Max in a frosty ocean to disguise his death as suicide caused by a drug overdose. As the mentor removes the cuff to tie him to a heavy metal, Max suddenly attacks him and tries to escape, but the 2 men begin to fire gunshots at him, forcing him to jump into the frosty ocean. Seeing no sign of movement in the frosty water, the mentor concludes that he's dead, so they leave. Meanwhile, Max holds his breath underneath the water for some minutes. Afterwards, he bursts out, gasping for air. As he tries to swim out to safety, his strength fails him, causing him to sink to the bottom. As he sinks deeper, he has a flashback to the night his wife was murdered. In the flashback, he sees his wife's killers dead on the floor, and as he walks into his daughter's room, he sees his wife happily caring for their child. Then he hears her saying, "Not yet." These 2 words cause him to experience a burst of energy that pushes him to swim to the surface of the ocean. He breaks through the ice and succeeds in swimming to safety. After making it out of the frosty waters, he quickly pulls out the 2 bottles of drugs from his jacket and ingests them to combat lethal hypothermia. The drugs immediately enhance his strength, causing him to imitate the roar of a demonic beast. He also begins to see hallucinations of winged creatures. With his newfound strength, he sets out to take revenge on his mentor. Meanwhile, Detective Bravura arrives at the SWAT team office and accuses them of intentionally killing the supervisor during the shootout at the company. He also invites an FBI officer to investigate the case. When the mentor learns of the detective's actions, he immediately assembles his armed team and calls a personal chopper in an attempt to invade the station and kill the detective. As they walk out of the pharmaceutical building into the driveway, Max suddenly shows up and opens fire at them, killing all the armed men. The mentor and his secretary manage to escape to the elevator. There, they call the company's major shareholder and beg her to send a helicopter to the rooftop to their rescue.
I need you to send a helicopter to the roof.
Meanwhile, Max faces off against tons of armed men and kills them without getting shot. However, he experiences hallucinations about a demonic winged creature. The hallucinations grow intense, making him experience being in hell with tons of demonic creatures flying around him. As he screams in agony, an armed man sneaks up from behind in an attempt to kill him, but Mona suddenly shows up to protect him. After the hallucination wears off, Mona encourages him to continue his fight for revenge. Meanwhile, as the police siren blasts through the city, the mentor runs to the rooftop to await his helicopter. He calls the shareholder to ask where the helicopter is, but she ignores his calls, leaving him stranded. As Mona infiltrates the company building, she finds the mentor's secretary strapping bombs to a wall. He tries to pull out a gun to shoot her, but she gains the upper hand and shoots him, along with other armed men, before escaping into the elevator. Meanwhile, Max finds the mentor's office empty. As he looks around for the man, he's distracted by another hallucination of the winged creatures. Unknown to him, the cops have arrived at the building. In a turn of events, the secretary, wounded from Mona's bullet, regains consciousness and pulls the trigger to bomb the building. The impact from the explosion causes Max to break free from his hallucinations, so he sets out again to find his mentor. On the rooftop, the mentor continues to dial the shareholder's number, but it's unreachable. At this moment, Max finds him on the rooftop, but he manages to fire 2 shots at Max before his bullet runs out. Even with the gunshot wounds, Max approaches and shoots him to his death. Finally, getting revenge, Max experiences a vision of his wife telling him, "Not yet." After the vision, the cops arrive at the rooftop and surround him for arrest. In a post-credit scene, we see Max entering a bar and ordering drinks. The bartender points out someone to him, so he goes to meet her. This person turns out to be Mona. She shows him a newspaper report on the success of the pharmaceutical company, with a picture of the shareholder on the front page. Seeing this, Max gives her a look that shows he knows who to kill next.